Good evening. On behalf of the Newark Public Library, welcome. I'm Tom Ankner, the supervising librarian in charge of the Charles F. Cummings, New Jersey Information Center here at the library. In the New Jersey room, we use the Newark City Directories all the time. They are very popular with people doing historical and genealogical research. They are so popular that we have digitized the full run of the directories from 1835 to 1964. They are available free of charge on the library's digital archive at digital.npl.org. We are excited about this program tonight to learn more about the history of this vital resource. We are also pleased to once again be co-sponsoring this Newark History Society program with NJPAC. Both organizations are important partners of ours. Both organizations are important partners of ours. We are glad that we are able to host these events that shed light on the city's history. We ask that people hold their questions until after our speakers talk. There will be plenty of time at the end of the evening for him to field queries. We will have a microphone for people here in person to ask questions. For those of you watching on Zoom, please enter your questions or comments in the chat box or the Q&A box. Thank you. Now here is Daniela Fonseca of NJPAC.
Thank you. Hey, everyone. Thank you. Thank you everybody for being here and being at home on the stream as well. I am an associate producer with NJPAC Community Engagement. And this is a partnership that we've been doing since I first started at NJPAC. So I'm always saying that and repeating it because it is important for me. And I really think it's important for Newark and our community. I want to remind you guys and bring to your attention that we are having the North to Shore Festival that's going to be at Asbury Park, Atlantic City, and then at Newark. And we have some free community events happening. At Newark, we're going to be here on June 23rd through the 30th. And on the 30th, we're going to have a stage here at Harriet Tubman Square, where you're going to have a few of the local artists performing. So I want to invite everybody to come. Thank you so much. Tim, please.
Thanks, Daniela. This is the last program in the 22nd year of the Newark History Society, which means that, gosh, it's probably program around 110 or so. We're particularly pleased tonight to have John Prieto talking about the Newark City Directory. John, as many of you know, has presented twice, at least twice, to the Newark History Society. Once on the Morris Canal, which was one of the best attended and most popular programs that we've had. And the second, more recently, on the Newark trolley car system. Tonight, John is going to talk about the background to the Newark City Directories going back to 1835. Any of us who have tried to do some research on Newark's history from the period after 1835 has depended on the Newark City Directories. I was exchanging notes earlier today with Mark Krasovic, who I think is joining on Zoom now, but he was talking about how much he uses the Newark City Directory in his work as a professor of history at Rutgers Newark. But he said, I don't know the backstory. And I think most of us don't know the backstory, and that is our opportunity to learn that from John. So John, welcome, coming up, and let's get started.
Thank you, Tim. Tim, I want to thank you again and the Newark History Society for the opportunity, of course, NJPAC for their sponsorship, and the Newark Public Library for hosting tonight's event. Also for the additional special help that I got in the research. I'm very honored and pleased to be here tonight to speak about our old friend, B.T. Pierson, who for 28 years engineered the content of this great work, the Newark City Directory. I will get in my comfortable chair. So when we're searching a story related to Newark, I find myself always, as Tim said, consulting Pierson City Directories. Again, as researchers, who among us has not? For good reason, to be sure. They offer baseline information on people, statistics, places, businesses of the day. Now, in researching this story, I was confronted, frankly, with the limited biological material on Mr. Pierson. There may be for a number of reasons, because of the times or because of the pedestrian nature of the work. But in coming to terms with this, I really wanted to know more about the man himself. Right? What was he like? What were his personality traits? How did he handle adversity? So in order to get a deeper dive, I had to look to the directories themselves. It soon became clear that this shift to directional research was going to be necessary. For a glimpse of his toil and trouble, I really had to look into his own words. If everybody would quickly read this. Now, you may recognize it. This is a cute play on words that Mr. Pierson really used in most of his volumes, if not all of them. It first appeared in the 1837 edition, I believe. So this modern twist of a Shakespearean quote from Othello represented a sentiment that I believe captured Pierson's cynical and skeptical nature. The directory's inaugural edition in 1835 came at a time when Newark was experiencing really a sudden surge of growth. The industrialization brought on by the Morris Canal and the railroads led to business development in an increasing population and hence a busier urban environment. There we go. Residents actually seem to be interested in their surroundings, and these directories seem to fill the void between curiosity and information. There we go. Okay. So this was the cover of the inaugural edition, 1835. You'll notice that he covers the current year into the next year. That's how he did it. After several editions of the directory had been printed, Pierson refocused his attention on perfecting the directory. Recognizing the hard economic times that had befallen Newark by 1837, he still felt the need to remind people that he was not in the business of losing money. He posted notices and commentary, sincerely hoping that, quote, the inhabitants of Newark will feel themselves in honor bound to sustain such an indispensable work. And it was a work that to which he was truly committed. Benjamin Pierson was born in 1793, just outside Morristown. His middle name comes from his mother's side of the family, Thompson. On his father's side, he was descended from the Reverend Abraham Pierson, who was one of the founders of Newark. Sometime in the early 1700s, Benjamin's ancestors moved from Newark to what they used to call west of the mountain, settling in Morris County. In his youth, Pierson involves himself with the duties of the family farm. At the age of 18, he suffered a hemorrhage, and he soon developed pulmonary issues and was forced to abandon the rigors of farming. He married the widow Paulina Gale. You'll see the document I found of the record of their marriage. And for a short while pursued the business of running a mineral spring house on the family homestead. Looking for a change, around 1830, he moved to Newark, where he worked for a short time in the employ of the New Jersey Railroad and Transportation Company as a ticket agent, perhaps serving as the first such agent in Newark. I did find a copy of the census with Mr. Pierson's name and family there. That was from Ancestry. There's a picture of the railroad. So eager to make a name for himself in a city that was on the rise, Pierson began a career in, quote, business writing in general at an office located at 350 Broad Street. It was in this position that he ultimately decided to take over the publication of Newark's first directory in 1835. He was originally hired by Moulton as an accountant to alphabetize the names that Moulton had put together. In June of that year, residents were first notified that a directory was soon to be published. Moulton had begun the adventure, but he had to give it up. He could not continue the project, and it was Pierson who bought the material for $50 and followed through with the completion of the directory in late 1835. The first edition turned out to be a great success, so much that that Pierson secured the copyright for the next season. There's the announcement. So 600 copies of the first edition were printed at 50 cents a copy. Quite a bargain. The directory in 1835 was about 125 pages, all in, and was introduced with the brief historical sketch of the town. We know now that the author of this history was written by William Burnett Kinney, who was the publisher of the Newark Daily Advertiser, and as it turns out, a somewhat distant relative of Mr. Pierson. The inaugural issue was rounded out with simple advertisements and the city's hotels. Newark's churches were also prominently listed, perhaps harking back to the Puritan ideal of forming church first, then the government. Of note were the names of the founding families, which were all well represented. In early 1836, Pierson sent notice to the Newark Daily Advertiser to all interested advertisers. Soon thereafter, he sent notification that he would begin canvassing each of Newark's then 4 wards. His pointed words regarding this effort served as a warning to the city's residents. He practically commanded that every dwelling should be prepared to answer any questions so that, quote, there may be no delay. Pierson even gave notice on the locations along Broad Street where the directory was made available. (1836) turned out to be a watershed year for Newark. The city was incorporated, transportation was in full swing, and despite the founders' original expectations, the city's population was growing quickly. Pierson's much improved second edition was growing as well. This was priced at 62.5 cents, and with more pages and more advertisements. It also introduced some new features, a map of the city, a counting house almanac, set for timing of that year's directory release, text of the city charter, and some statistics of the city, such as a list of the number of establishments categorized by trade. It also contained over 5,000 names and gave an estimated city population of over 20,000 residents. This year, he sold 900 copies. Not only did he sold, but he fell about 100 short. The business of producing the city directory was by no means highly profitable for Pierson, as he soon found out. Even with periodic price increases, higher costs in terms of expenses and time invested really dug in. To help make ends meet, Pierson ventured into house numbering. The price for a common number was 25 cents each for address, and for gilt, 50 cents each. He had planned to do this himself, by the way. He covered a lot of ground early on, affixing numbers to some 1,400 houses by the end of 1839, which is pretty impressive. Perhaps frustrated by the lack of city effort, Pierson also began the process of putting up street signs on his own accord. He was committed to having all streets marked with signs, so he was ahead of his time. His efforts mostly led to further frustration from residents' alterations and non-payment by the city. Well, there we go. The early years of his directory posed their challenges. We talked about a poor economy. Occasionally, he had an oversupply of directories, even difficulty in securing a local printer, which for 1 or 2 years forced him to use an outfit from New York City because nobody in Newark would do it for him. He often called on Newarkers to help sustain the directory. The economic panic of 1837 and subsequent downturn certainly cut into his business. After a few lean years, he wished for better times when he wrote, quote, "Hope keeps the heart whole." In his distraught state, Pierson once described the challenging times as, quote, "nothing but gloom and thick darkness." Pretty heavy words. There's the picture of the map insert, which he expanded later on. Here is an ad for his work. Job writing done as usual. Pierson kept at it. He continued to publish the directory and find ways to improve it, such as adding an index in 1837 to help the user navigate the directory better, and the updated city map, which cost him $150 out of pocket, which was a lot of money. As he wrote in May 1838, I quote, "I have spared neither time nor expense to make it as perfect and interesting as the nature of the case will admit." And so it was done. In the 1840 edition, he introduced the quote, "Runner's Guide to the Streets of Newark," which listed all the streets and their cross streets so as to aid delivery and direction. That was quite innovative, in my opinion. Here is one of his writings. I purpose to see if the city of Newark will sustain the directory. I don't mean to publish another edition for glory. In times like the present, it is necessary to sleep with one eye open. There's a little bit of the cynicism. He also enhanced the information the directory offered, such as listing streets with new and remodeled houses and their owners, while at times listing both vacant or new buildings. Also appearing were the annual report of interments and the New Jersey executive listing of politicians. Additionally, he printed practical items like recipes, lists of the names and doctors and lawyers in the city, local firehouses, and the price of goods. The wider world was also let in, such as data for New York City and Philadelphia, as well as official US census numbers. And on occasion, he would print an appendix to the current edition, adding back in names too late for the scheduled count. It is suspected that he did not want to make a habit of this, lest it become too much of an irritant. Here's the runner's guide. Facts that need no comment, even a dressmaker's list. Interesting items. There's the appendix. Pierson liked to write about the growth of Newark within the directory's pages. He often told about the increases in population, in business, and in housing. His printed population data were estimates. You have to keep that in mind. But they were not far off the official numbers. He mentions that he used a factor of 3.5 or 4 times the number of names to achieve the population totals. He was very close. He was amazed at the city's progressive growth and made every attempt to get the information right. And beginning with the 1848 edition of the directory up until his last, Pierson inserted a woodcut image of himself nearby to the Shakespearean quote. It was as if Pierson himself was there to remind readers that he was watching. Now, Pierson liked to practice efficiency in his operations. He seemed to take some pride in that. For example, in 1849, all the printing for the directory, save for the names, was done in advance. This allowed him to release the edition earlier than normal. Over the years, Pierson, of course, was forced to raise the price of the directory in order to keep up with his expenses. But an analysis of the list price per directory page reveals an interesting fact. Over time, the resultant ratio actually trended downward. So you were getting more for your money. Pierson also moved his office several times over the course of the directory's run, from Broad Street to Bank Street, ending up at Court Street, presumably to save on overhead. Some more statistics. But the net income from his work continued to be lacking. He complained about his situation often, saying, quote, "Instead of making me rich enough to retire, it has yielded me only scanty support." Some years after the business did improve by the early 1840s, Pierson thanked the citizens for their support, but was soon scolding them again, such as on the subject of getting his information right. Quote, "And if anything should be wrong, I want no lip or abuse from anyone." Pierson managed to keep his subscriptions to his directory fairly consistent, despite all the trouble, hitting about 1,000 per year into the 1850s. Despite all these headaches, it was a testament to the value that Newark citizens placed on his work. Perhaps in a way to entice his advertisers, ads that were once placed near the back of the book soon moved up to the front, sometimes taking up an entire page. There were more ads, and more of them were larger. Pictorials of a particular trade in the ad, which were referred to as stock cuts, frequently embraced the text. As his expenses rose, so did his troubles. He often commented in his directory on the state of his business. In many editions, Pierson railed against not being paid for his work. His writings also included tales of woe on everything from canvassing to criticisms. While he sometimes went so far as to take out notices in the local newspaper, these missives mostly appeared right in the pages of the directory, usually with the somewhat misleading title advertisement. Pierson, yes. Yeah, okay. Gotcha. Pierson referred to these notices as his, quote, editorial labors, which first appeared in 1837, as if to say they were required reading by citizens so that they might fully appreciate his trouble. These editorials were certainly pointed and perhaps unexpected by the reader. I found that there are many adjectives suitable to describe them. Blunt, frank, disarming, sarcastic, shaming, condescending, scolding. And for effect, Pierson used italics for some words and big capital letters for others. In the beginning, the editorials were also placed in the front of the directory so you wouldn't miss them. That's how they were headed, advertisement. In his editorials, we find Pierson's sentiments running the gamut. In 1838, he, quote, trusts that his labors will be rewarded by the good citizens of Newark. By 1840, Pierson writes, quote, now, if the citizens of Newark do not do their duty faithfully by not only purchasing, but italics paying for the books, they may capital whistle for their next directory. An 1842 editorial ended with him thanking the citizens for their liberal patronage when he said, my friends, come to the rescue. By 1845, he summarizes his, quote, most useful matter over the first 11 editions. But by 1851, he was scolding his advertisers for not paying up, lest they never have the chance again. These advertisements, however, I felt showed a personal side to Pierson that many may not have even known or cared to know. But they also offered a portal into his personality, his workaholic nature, where the directory was concerned. Quote, I have from the commencement devoted all my time and talents to the business of the directory, numbering, etc., and could not engage in anything else. This was his vocation. Through the years, Pierson seemed to have built up a healthy suspicion of the city's inhabitants. He often commented on their complaints about the accuracy or completeness of his editions, once declaring, quote, this advertisement clears me of any blame on my part. He questioned the residents' refusal to be listed. Finally writing in 1852, quote, all I want to know of any man is that he refuses to have his whereabouts known. To all such, beware. And of course, regarding some residents' refusal to pay, he wrote in 1850, quote, give us as little trouble as possible, for I have had my full share over the last 16 years. Pierson was also not above printing self-praise for his efforts. He often reminded the citizens of the value of the directory and what it possessed, and felt it was worth the price. He once wrote, quote, "And as regards collecting the names, I assert that it is italics, well done, for I done all the work myself and consider it a great feat." During canvassing, residents often sent children or servants to the door, sometimes with wrong information. He also felt, as we mentioned, the city should measure every street for street signs. And of course, he was reduced to making unfulfilled claims for payment after he went ahead and installed them himself. Citizens often changed their house numbers or street signs and complained about missing names in the directory and its rising prices. And of course, there was this thing of not being paid for the directory upon delivery. It all seemed to be too much for Pierson when he wrote in 1855, quote, "This has been going on for 21 years. It is too trying." So perhaps reminded of his earlier days of falling ill when he was farming, he had written in the 1842 edition, quote, "Prompted by the belief that at some future day, should I live, I would make something handsome of it." With his chosen profession, he was, quote, "determined to make or break." With these words, Pierson was showing the strain. And the toll of the work had taken on Pierson was mounting. But beyond the problems with the business, it is noteworthy that Pierson was befallen by personal tragedy. His wife Paulina died at age 33, while their son Isaac died at 11 months, and their daughter Paulina died at age 10. His editorials never spoke about his family life. Outside of his place of business, his home address only appeared once, which was listed as 20 Clinton Street. It is perhaps a testament to his vocational determination that he stuck to the business and pressed on, once writing, quote, "I am one who never surrenders." He would continue to write missives in his advertisements, reminding everyone to pay. Over time, however, Pierson eventually softened his approach, believe it or not. His, quote, "editorial labors became fewer and farther apart, mostly relegated now to the back of the book." With the 1854 edition, Pierson celebrated his 20 years of publication, where he proudly proclaimed, "My, quote, my book has now reached 500 pages. And for taste and arrangement of matter, it cannot be beat by any book of the kind in any city." Pierson's emotions also seemed to mellow with age. Writing early on, he tells of being, quote, "engaged in this work reluctantly," and, quote, "encountering obstacles which no one unacquainted with the undertaking can appreciate." While later on the subject of being paid, he quotes the Bible when he says, "Newarkers, quit yourselves like men." But in a somewhat weary state, almost with an air of resignation, he later writes, finally, quote, "I wish all to be prepared to pay." And then in his very last edition in 1862, to this phrase, he adds meekly, "if possible." Alas, the 1862 edition of the Directory of the City of Newark was to be Pierson's last, because he died of consumption in June of that year, just after the directory's release. So he got his business taken care of. The numbers for the final edition, $1.75, contained over 600 pages and upwards of 20,000 names. We found his will and testament. Apparently, he was worth $1,000 when he died. Of his legacy, it may be said that he was a man who persevered, and that's my emphasis, in such a, quote, perplexing business, producing a work that on balance improved the lives of his neighbors. It's also a testament to his efforts that the directory carried on for over another 100 years. He was also a dedicated and proud citizen of Newark. He once wrote that his editorial labors were strictly, quote, devoted to the amelioration of this beautiful and once flourishing city. News and remembrances of his passing took several forms. The Newark Daily Advertiser stated in its editorial, quote, of him, it may be said that he was an honest man. A report in the New York Times referred to him as a, quote, somewhat eccentric gentleman. The next edition of the directory, now run by Charles Fulwell, called him, quote, an honest, quiet, unassuming citizen. It is significant to note that Fulwell's first edition, 1863 and 64, was titled Pierson's Newark City Directory. It basically keeps the Pierson format mostly intact, adding only a few items, such as a separate business directory and a section for corrections. While it is a certainty that Pierson had many acquaintances, we're not sure if he had many good friends. In researching Mr. Pierson, the nickname Tompey was discovered, Tompey. It is unclear whether Pierson was universally known by this moniker. He does speak of a camaraderie of sorts way back in 1840. Quote, there are many warm friends to the directory enterprise that fully appreciate my services, for which I feel grateful. But in the next sentence, he is right back to business when he counters that the number of friends is, quote, too limited for any man. Pierson may have been too involved in his work to expand his social circle. But to the extent that there were friends to be found, we might look to the users of his directory, the travelers who successfully reached their destination, who gained knowledge of their surroundings, who felt proud of their city, or even enjoyed seeing their names in print, all because of his efforts. And of course, all researchers are among the, quote, friends of Pierson who continually mine the rich vein of Newark information and will likely benefit from his efforts indefinitely. The end. Thank you.
Okay. So if you're watching on Zoom, just type your questions, excuse me, in the chat box or the Q&A box, and we will alternate between questions here in JBAR, in the library, and questions online. Does anybody here have?
Am I okay where I'm sitting, Tim? Yeah.
Yeah, just hold the microphone out like this.
Yeah. Okay,
Muffled.
good. Yeah.
Thank you for that wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
About how many copies were sold of the directory and who was the consumer, who was buying this directory? I assume like for the average working person in Newark, they couldn't even afford the price. I mean, who was it? Was it aimed at?
Yeah, I never saw who the typical buyer was. We did have some of the numbers of the amount that he sold. He was reaching 1,000 per year for many years.
Yeah.
He started off small, but he built a following. And although he had a lot of complaints, people were buying them. So I would imagine mostly the city residents who I think were generally interested in their surroundings. Enough so that they could refer to his book.
You mentioned the edition size. Do you know how large the editions became over time?
I think at one time, Tim, he did top 1,200.
1,200. So you may have 20,000 names and 1,200 copies, which
Yeah,
speaks to it a little bit.
I mean, there were also times where he didn't have enough and sometimes when he had too many.
Bill May asked a question based on one of your slides that went by quickly. I noted the same thing, but it listed a Newton High School. Was that a Newark High School or was that
No.
a typo? Do you know?
No, Newton High School was, I think, in Newton, New Jersey.
So why would he include something about Newton, New Jersey in a Newark?
I
directory?
think that's the appeal of the directory. He had things in there that really had nothing to do with the local residents. You could see some of the things that he had in there. Some of the facts that need no comment, I think it was titled.
Other questions here? Okay.
Thank you. That's a very thoughtful presentation.
Thank you.
I might add that one of the things that's daunting about his work was that he had to account for changes of residence every year, and come April 1st or May 1st, I'm not sure which day it was in Newark.
Yeah, that's
There
about
was
right.
an upheaval of everyone who was renting, looking for accommodation that was either more spacious, more favorably located, or more affordable. I want to ask you about any evidence of employees or helpers that you might have found in your research. And then I will write to you about one directory and specifically which we cannot locate, and that's the 1839. Although we know that it was printed because it was issued, there's a notice of it being issued in the Advertiser. But I'll send you more by
Okay.
email about that.
Yeah, I think there may have been some gaps. That may have been
Uh,
one of them. Now, he used to have
In the digital archive, yeah, we do not
Yeah.
have the 1839.
the 2 year length. So I think you're right. I think that was the year there was a gap. As far as employees, I could not come up with anything definitive. However, he did reference from time to time that he was using canvassers, and he would tap into that group who would do his work. And I think it got tougher and tougher to deal with things such as renters. And I think he made a comment at some point that he was dismayed that people were coming in and out of the city. So on a personal level, he had trouble keeping track. And so did his workers. He thought everybody should be in a house, I think, not an apartment.
To follow up on that, Ron Becker is watching from Florida.
Yes.
And he comments that he found using the city directories extremely helpful when he did his history of the Jewish community of Newark. And he was asking it as perhaps the same question, how he put the directory together. Did he go from house to house to interview people? Did he hire a staff to help him out? And then he asks, how do the Newark directories compare to ones for other cities? Do you know that?
I don't know that. I have not seen other larger cities' directories as a point of reference. I'm guessing none were as colorful as Pierson's. But according to Mr. Pierson, for what it's worth, he felt it was the best in the business, for the record. But I'm venturing a guess that probably nobody worked harder at putting it together.
But you said he would go from door to door
Yeah.
and sometimes be frustrated when children came out and didn't provide the right answer.
Yes, providing the wrong information, and he was cynical enough to realize that people were doing it on purpose.
You might add another adjective to your list, and that is cranky.
Yeah,
Is
yes.
that what
Yes,
Uh,
that would be a good one.
Do you, can you know anything about the transition to the person who succeeded him? Did this person have to buy the rights to it from his heirs, or do you know how that worked?
That is a good question. I did not see in the research how that evolved. He did honor Pierson by keeping his name there. And it looked very similar to as far as the mechanics of how the sale was turned over, I did not come across anything. We saw the picture of his will. That was a bit vague. We don't know where the money wound up. If he had creditors or debtors, I don't know.
We have a question from Alan Lipman from watching on Zoom. And he had an eagle eye on one of the slides. I guess it was the population slide, which seemed to showed a decrease from 21,000 to 16,000 from 1837 to 1838. And he's wondering, is there any explanation for that decrease of 5,000?
I believe Pierson at one time was listing interments. So I believe there were a lot of people who passed away. And I think that accounts for that.
So do you know whether there was a particular outbreak of some disease in that period?
Tim, I did not come across that in particular. It was a tough time economically. We know that.
Certainly, that was the panic year. That's
Yeah,
true.
yes.
Thank you ever so much for that wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
At the time, there were some free people of color in Newark. Were they included? And if so, how were they distinguished?
Not, there weren't a whole lot of mentions of it. He did speak of them occasionally. Just in passing, I don't know that there were many statistics about it in there. He would refer to churches that blacks might attend, things like that. But not much.
People's names usually have the word colored after them.
Yeah, usually have a little C after the name, so you
Yes.
can begin to do
Occasionally they
They're all-
would, right. Yes.
distinguish that way. Kathy Heim has asked, and Tom Ankner mentioned this at the beginning, but does the library have a complete set of the directories and have they been digitized? So just to repeat, the entire series, not just Pierson's, but from 1835 to 1964, except for 1839, has been digitized by the library, and you can find them I go to digital.npl.org is the easiest way to find those. And that's a great resource.
It is.
Nancy?
I was wondering about the ratio between the advertisements and the rest of the stuff. Did he have to get like a certain number of ads to make it possible to put in everything else? Is it about half and half, or how did it?
I suspect that he did. I never came across what that business number might be. But I suspect that he did, because you could see over time, the ads got bigger and there were more of them. So I'm sure that helped him despite his complaints.
And we may need help with the other Newark historians here. Bill May has asked a follow-on question. When did the Newark government take on the task of an annual directory? And I guess I would ask, did the city of Newark ever take on that task? Clearly the telephone company took it over at some point, but who published the city directory through the 50s and the 60s? Private firm?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I don't know.
But it was not the city.
I don't think so.
So we're hearing that some national organization took it on as part of
Yep.
a product array. John, we've always been interested in the history of Newark, which is that appeared in the beginning. You, with help, identified that William Kinney wrote that. And that's really the earliest kind of narrative history of Newark. Did that change much? How many years did that history of Newark run in the city directory? Was it augmented or corrected or expanded over time?
Tim, I did check into that. I can't give you an exact number. My best estimate was that it ran for maybe up to 10 years. And I believe the later versions did change a little bit. They may have even been enhanced. But I don't think he took anything away, but eventually it went away.
Well, the nice thing is that we can check that out pretty quickly online now, I guess.
Yep.
Beth Zach Cohen has given us the name of the later publisher, Price and Lee. There we are.
Up on the reference.
Okay.
Good old Beth. Any other questions? Let me do one more check online, but this has been a good back and forth tonight between in person and I have no more from Zoom. Arnold, you get the last one.
There you go. There you go.
So at what point did the city or I mean, how did people get their mail is what occurred to me without a numbering system, without street system? And at what point did either the city or the post office kind of take over that task? Any idea?
That's a great question. We know that the post office is an entity unto its own. Say what you will about it. But I don't know how they would have done that. I appreciated his desire to number the houses and to put street signs up and even do it himself, which I didn't know that ahead of time before I researched it. Amazing. And he tried to get his money back, and of course he didn't.
So, yeah, that actually brings up a question of mine. So he actually assigned house numbers on his own without,
Tom, I wondered that myself. I believe they were there. I think the numbers actually preceded his directory, the numbering system. So he did his best to try and keep up with that. But people would go ahead and alter them as well. I was told that people would even hang their own numbers because for any reason, like the number of people they had in their family or, you know, things like that. So they would put up, and it must have baffled him.
Well, thank you, John. It's good to know the backstory. This was a period when Newark was growing really fast.
Yes.
And Pierson's directory clearly helped because it helped the businesses keep track of their competitors or suppliers, potential customers.
Yes.
It helped those runners get make their deliveries, all those things that
Absolutely.
would allow a village to grow into a city.
Yes,
And that was happening in this period.
he helped chart the growth of Newark.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
think he was genuinely interested in being part of that.
So let us give a round of applause. Thank you so much, John.
Thank you.
Uh,
Thank you all for being here, and I appreciate your support.
So we are taking a break for the summer, but we pick up again in September. And our friend Michael Immerso is giving a talk in September about Newark's theater district in the first part of the 20th century. So we'll start right back up, and we have a full schedule of programs for the 2024-2025 year. And if you're not on our mailing list or not yet a member, we encourage you. And we hope you enjoy the summer. And those of you who are here, have some food, and we'll see you in September.